Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 9 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Vegas Golden Knights and lost by a score of 7-3. This is the first time that the Sharks have gone up against former Sharks forward Tomas Hertl after having traded him at the deadline of last year to these very same Vegas Golden Knights. And what they did is prove to Hertl that he made a good choice in not wanting to stick around here and sort of requesting a trade to a more contender-like team as the Sharks extend their season-opening losing streak to 9 games. In fact, setting a record as the first team in the long history of this National Hockey League to open back-to-back seasons with 9+ game losing streaks. Last year it was 11, and this year it is still ongoing, and the sky is the limit to the amount of losing the Sharks could open this season with. Now, when it comes to the beginning of this game, the Sharks were obviously hoping for a better start than in their previous one against the Los Angeles Kings, where they fell into a 3-goal hole just a few minutes into the first period, and well, their hopes were immediately dashed as Tanner Pearson just a couple of minutes into this one would score to make it 1-0 Vegas. Jack Eichel just a couple of minutes later would follow up on that to make it 2-0, and that was really just the beginning of the Vegas Golden Knights' dominance in the first 20 minutes of this game. They would outshoot the Sharks 22-4, eventually adding a third goal to put the Sharks in a very familiar position, down 3 goals going into the second period. Now, in that period, that middle frame, Mikael Granlund would score yet again to bring the Sharks to within 2, and then they would pick up a power play for themselves. So there was a potential chance here for the beginning of a comeback. But instead of the Sharks getting a special teams goal to put them to within 1, they fell back to that 3-goal deficit as they give up a shorthanded goal to Vegas that made it 4-1. Dorofeev would then add a power play goal for 5-1, and while Sturm would score in the dying seconds of the second to bring it back to within 3, it felt as though that comeback was kind of put away at that point. In the third, the Sharks, they looked okay, but clearly not really all that many great chances anyway. Mark Stone would make it 6-2, Cunnin would bring it back to within 3 before Howden would put it away at 7-3, the final score of this game. Moving on to the players to talk about before I actually get into their performances, there is one person who I do want to talk about first, and that is Sharks head coach Ryan Warsofsky, specifically about a quote that he had in his post-game presser of last game against the Los Angeles Kings. Now, I don't have the word-to-word quote here, but I will give more of a paraphrased version of it. Essentially, he said that the Sharks had too many passengers currently on the team, not enough players playing with the passion necessary to have success at the NHL level. Too many players treating it as a business. But what was most important about the message sent here was that he said that he wanted to weed those players out, essentially to target them and perhaps remove them from the San Jose Sharks lineup. And so this was a big message sent, some big words said here by Sharks head coach Ryan Warsofsky. And so over the next couple of days, you're thinking, what is going to be the move that Warsofsky makes? What's going to catch us completely by surprise here? Who is going to get the boot? Tyler Toffoli, Alex Wennberg, Mario Ferraro, Jan Rutta? Which player here who has been a passenger recently is going to end up getting the night off? And what was the one-line substitution that they ended up doing? They kept Klim Kostin as a healthy scratch in replacement for Will Smith. You didn't have to watch the post-game presser to know that that was going to be the move that ends up happening. Otherwise, the lineup, outside of a few swaps between first and second line and things like that, remained the exact same. And so the build-up from that pretty scathing comment led to absolutely nothing, because we're not actually breaking new ground here by having Klim Kostin be the healthy scratch. He has been in and out of the lineup already multiple times this season. And the thing that even makes it sort of worse in a way is that if we take a look at the progression of this game, if you had to choose a player who Warsofsky may be angling towards removing from the lineup for the following game against Utah, you would have to give the leading candidate as Danil Gushchin, who has also been a healthy scratch multiple times this season for whatever reason. And so there really isn't some sort of big message being sent here by Ryan Warsofsky, who is just maintaining the status quo. Whether this comment had been said or not, it doesn't feel as though, at least on the surface, that anything has actually ended up changing. Now, it is certainly possible that the Sharks, because they're currently on this road trip, they don't really have a lot of options to actually do anything. Sure, they could call somebody up from the San Jose Barracuda and fly them out here to join the Sharks currently, but that is logistically a bit of a difficult move, so it is possible that the Sharks are waiting for them to return back home before they make some sort of sweeping level changes to the current roster, and then maybe then I will eat my words as they call up Graf and they call up Cardwell and they call up Biestet and they make a bunch of substitutions. But honestly, I don't really foresee anything major happening, maybe one sort of call-up, and so this message feels as though it's kind of falling on deaf ears here for Ryan Warsofsky, as there really isn't a lot of bite behind this bark. When it comes to the Sharks' top line for tonight, I actually got excited when I saw that these three players were going to be put together, Granlund and Toffoli joined by Danil Gushchin, but it only ends up lasting for the first few minutes of this first period. They get a few shifts together, but I guess because the Golden Knights were completely dominant, it is Danil Gushchin who ends up being the casualty here. And what's weird about that, I guess it's honestly kind of expected, but still, based on what I had said, is that I don't even think Gushchin was that bad, and then on top of that, I don't even think he was the worst player on this line. That would probably have to go to Tyler Toffoli, who I will get to in a little bit, but I thought Gushchin had a decent enough start to this game. Obviously, it wasn't good, it definitely wasn't great, but it wasn't the worst player on the team. He had one of the only shots in the first period for the San Jose Sharks, so that's, I guess, saying something, and it felt as though this demotion was more so because, like I said, it's the easy choice for Ryan Warsofsky because Gushchin has been a target mostly for this entire season. Anybody else, it would be a bigger message to be sent, but Ryan Warsofsky just refraining from actually doing so at this point. When it comes to his line mates here, as I said, I thought Tyler Toffoli had a really bad start to this game. I really don't think he has been doing much of good work for the San Jose Sharks. Sure, he put up a couple of okay shifts as we got to like the third period of this game, but it must be mentioned yet again, score effects come into play here. The Golden Knights firmly in control of this game. They have the advantage. They let up the gas a little bit. That creates a lot more open ice for some chances to actually be had, and that's likely why the Sharks looked a little bit better as this game did wear on. I'm not going to give tons of credit for Tyler Toffoli for managing to pick up chances in a game where the Sharks are trailing by 3 or 4 goals with 10 minutes left on the clock, for instance. And so this is a situation where when it actually mattered for San Jose in the early parts of this game, Tyler Toffoli, who is supposed to be one of the Sharks' better players, perhaps even their best player on paper. Obviously, Granlund is proving that he is the best player currently on the San Jose Sharks, but Toffoli, brought in as this big name guy through free agency, really hasn't been living up to that, and this game continues that. When it comes to the final player on this line, we do have Granlund. It's kind of like the Los Angeles Kings game previously, where he does manage to score, and you do have to commend him for that. But at the same time, this is a first line that is again losing a lot of the straight up head-to-head matchups against the other team's first or even second lines that they are going up against. It was the case in the previous one against the Kings, where they're on the ice for pretty much every single goal against there in that first period. Here tonight, it's not every single one, but they were on for multiple of them. The defensive game is not really there. Tyler Toffoli, a big issue, but Granlund, while he's had some good defensive shifts, at other times he has been struggling. And so it was a very up and down game for Granlund. You do have to give the kudos for managing to score. He keeps up the point streak, all of that. He's one of the more productive players for the San Jose Sharks, but at the same time, you are hoping for a little bit more consistent play, what the Sharks have not been getting from him for the last couple of games. When it comes to the second line, we have Zetterlund and Wennberg joined by William Eklund. As I mentioned earlier on, Gushchin getting demoted from that top line. Eventually, Eklund works his way there from the start of the second period onward. So these three players didn't really remain together for that long. When it comes to William Eklund, while I don't think he was necessarily as bad as Tyler Toffoli, I do think that there is definitely still a much higher level that Eklund can reach. We saw that a couple of games ago against the Anaheim Ducks. Obviously, the Ducks, a much easier team to go up against compared to the Vegas Golden Knights, who could very well and probably will end up being, at this rate, a playoff team this season. And so it's a much more difficult competition. But eventually you do have to manage to find some success against even the better teams in the NHL. And Eklund not really managing to do so here tonight. He was decent, not the Sharks' worst player, but far from their best and far from being particularly good. When it comes to the other two players on this line, we start off with Alex Wennberg, who had been slowly but surely improving. Here tonight, kind of didn't really do anything, honestly. I don't think he was generally completely awful, irredeemable, but you barely really noticed him all that much on the ice, which again, for a big name free agent signing, is not a good thing. And then when it comes to the final player here, we have Fabian Zetterlund, who, sort of on the contrary to the players I've already talked about, was perhaps one of the Sharks' better players. I actually thought Zetterlund got involved at least a little bit offensively throughout this game. When the Sharks were getting chances, it felt as though half the time Zetterlund was involved in some sort of way. So I guess that was actually kind of nice to see. It's still not great, but it's at least better than others. So relative to them, he had a good game. When it comes to the third line, we have Goodrow and Smith and Dellandrea. So Smith steps back in, and this is where I want to talk a bit about, once again, this development plan that the Sharks have for him. It must be noted that obviously I do not know any of the background, behind-the-scenes types of information. For all I know, that this is a very good move for Will Smith and Mike Grier, and there's been tons of different conversations, and they truly feel that this is the correct way, and perhaps it is doing him some wonders. But all I can really judge is based on what I have seen on the ice, and what I've seen on the ice currently from Will Smith is this pattern where he had a good game against the Chicago Blackhawks. He immediately gets benched the following game against the Winnipeg Jets, comes back into the lineup against Colorado and has very little impact at all, practically invisible. Then he plays another game against the Ducks, and while he had some bad plays in this one, he had multiple good plays as well. He's back up here, but then immediately is benched once more against the Kings. And then tonight, another low-impact game. He had a few shifts at the end of this one in the third period where Warsofsky was sending him over the boards over and over. There was a bit more ice to work with, and he did look okay to end this game the last few minutes. But when it mattered, like I said with Toffoli, in the first, the second period, he did pretty much nothing, practically invisible. And so it is this pattern where he has a good game and then the Sharks immediately take him out of the lineup, preventing him from actually being able to build any sort of momentum. And now twice in the games after being benched, he hasn't really come back and been particularly impressive at all. So again, I can't comment on the actual plan here for the San Jose Sharks. I can only base my opinion on what I am seeing on the ice. And what I am seeing on the ice is a player who isn't given the opportunity currently to actually continue to move upwards, because it feels as though anytime he's building any sort of momentum, it's immediately stopped in its tracks. When it comes to the other two players on this line, we have Barclay Goodrow, and I do want to use this as an opportunity to talk about the Sharks' current situation, because we see Goodrow in this game get promoted up to the top line for the San Jose Sharks for the last half of that first period. He was the one who originally replaced Gushchin. Now in the end, by the time the second and the third period rolled around, he ended up back onto this third line. But the fact that that was even a decision point shows exactly the weakness that the Sharks have made when it comes to their roster construction. It's all well and nice to pick up these two-way defensive guys in your bottom six who are just going to be like giving you a decent effort night in, night out. That's fine, especially if your top six is incredibly reliable. If you got McDavid and Draisaitl and McKinnon and Makar and Rantanen all up there in your top six or on the back end, you can have a more defensive type of bottom six that you can just reliably send on to be decent defensively. But when your top six is like this for the Sharks, where they're kind of up in the air, unpredictable, not always particularly good, you want a few more offensive options in your bottom six, and the Sharks really just don't have that. So you see here, Gushchin is the sacrificial lamb here for Ryan Warsofsky. He gets demoted from the top six, and your only option amongst these dime a dozen bottom six guys is to have Barclay Goodrow step up there. Now, no matter how poorly Gushchin may or may not have been playing, I don't think he was playing all that well, but even if he was disastrous, you're still going to have a better chance of scoring with Gushchin up there than with Barclay Goodrow. And this is not a comment on Goodrow's game here tonight. I actually thought he was one of the Sharks' better defensive players in this game. It's not saying much, but still. But when it comes to playing on a first line with Goodrow, with Granlund and Toffoli, you're really not going to get anything. So again, it is the weakness of the roster construction here, that the fact is that because of the way the Sharks' bottom six has shaped up due to the decision points made, the Sharks don't actually have a lot of in-game options to work with when it comes to swapping players around. And then we get to Ty Dellandrea, who I thought if there was one player to bump up to a top six, I would feel like Dellandrea should probably be that guy. He's the one who's playing with the most energy, the most speed, and seems to have at least a little bit of skill in his game. Now, all that being said, I actually don't think Dellandrea was particularly good here tonight. He was the one a bit out of position. Same with Will Smith. You could argue between the two faults here, but on that first goal, that really started the pain train here for the San Jose Sharks. So not the best game for Dellandrea, but still he seems to have a little bit more upside than anybody else. And then when it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, not really a ton to say here, at least when it comes to Grundstrom, who was rather invisible, took a bad penalty. He realistically should be in and out of the lineup, and mostly out of the lineup because he's rarely shown much anything better than slightly above average. Nico Sturm, nice to see him score, but it wasn't a great game otherwise. And then Luke Kunin, what I will say is that Kunin, he does manage to score, and he is managing to do the exact thing that I said the Sharks needed to do more of in the previous review against the Los Angeles Kings. I said specifically they need to get to the net. That's where the good things happen. And the Sharks did that on 2 of their 3 goals. The Mikael Granlund one, he forces it on net. He sticks with it. He stays strong. He pushes it past Ilya Samsonov for the Golden Knights. Luke Kunin plants himself in front of the net, takes a couple of whacks at it, manages to get it back past the Golden Knights goaltender as well. So commendations there, but it is again a situation. Kunin gets boosted up to the second line. This is not a long-term solution. Kunin, for as decent he has been and impactful and energy-filled that he has been this year, he's still not a top 6 forward. It's not a move going forward. So the Sharks, if there is a call-up to be made or something along those lines, that's probably the direction to go, because right now having these types of bottom 6 guys filling into your top 6 is not a recipe for getting your first win of the season. When it comes to the defensive side of things, we have Cody Ceci and Jake Walman. Ceci, again, very bad. Massive fall from grace for Ceci. It feels as though he came into this season with the hope that the Sharks would be a little bit better than he would have thought, and so he played quite well in those first 3 games, and then when they ended up being all 3 losses, Ceci just lost complete hope or something, because he's just been so awful in these last few. He's been puck watching. He doesn't really seem fully engaged or fully involved. Those first 3 games of the season, you're seeing Ceci jump into the forecheck and really get involved in these games, and then now it's just a lot of sitting back, a lot of just kind of stationary, standing still type of play in his own zone. It's been really disappointing to see for sure. Jake Walman, surprisingly, I actually thought started this game off decently well. His first few shifts, I thought he had some slick stick plays with his stick in the defensive zone, but then just kind of fell off a cliff a little bit in the last 50 or so minutes of this one, so it didn't end up being a particularly good game for Walman, but at the same time, he's weighed down heavily at the moment by Cody Ceci. When it comes to the Sharks' second defensive pairing, Ferraro and Ruda, no surprise that one of the worst defensive pairings probably in the NHL. I haven't really looked at the stats, but that would not surprise me one bit. Probably one of the worst defensive pairings in the NHL, going up against a pretty good Vegas team, would get absolutely caved in from a defensive perspective. That's exactly what happened here. They were not good, even remotely so. One thing that I will bring up as a slight positive from Mario Ferraro, we saw a bit of a show-off offensively here tonight. There was actually one play in the third period where he got around Golden Knights forward Mark Stone, who's actually one of the best defensive forwards in the entire league, and yet he managed to make him look silly and actually get a decent chance on net. So that was kind of funny. It doesn't really move anything forward. It's not as though this is a sign of Ferraro really activating his offensive instincts and actually being an offensive guy for the Sharks, but it, again, kind of comical to see in a night that was otherwise really bad for both of these players. And then when it comes to the Sharks' third defensive pairing, we have Thrun and Thompson. To start off with Thompson, as he gets yet another game over Matt Benning, continues to be a better option than Benning. Don't get me wrong, I'm very happy to see Thompson get this one, but after that really, really good game against the Anaheim Ducks, now that he's going up against tougher competition like the Kings, like the Golden Knights, you can see some of those sort of beginner's mistakes and things like that having a little bit more issues. I don't think this was an awful game here against the Golden Knights. It certainly wasn't at a Jan Ruda or Mario Ferraro level of awful, but obviously there were some mistakes here. The same would go with Henry Thrun. Obviously, Thrun does have a little bit more experience, so you're hoping for a little bit better play, and I will say he was a bit better for sure than Thompson, and he was definitely also better than where he was at in the previous game against the Los Angeles Kings, but certainly some work to be done here. And then finally, we get to the Sharks goaltender Vitek Vanacek, and he lets in 7 goals. That's obviously not going to ever be good, but it's actually made worse by the fact that some of these goals were really at extremely inopportune times. Now, some of these he didn't really have much of a chance on. The second goal from Howden, the Mark Stone goal, the Dorofeev one, nobody's really going to be able to make those saves. But there were 2 goals here tonight that came at such terrible spots and that were really bad from Vanacek, and that put the Sharks in a really bad position. The first one is the first goal of the game from Tanner Pearson. Yes, you argue, not very good defensive coverage. Nobody's really getting on to Tanner Pearson. Dellandrea just a little bit too slow, but this is a weak goal. Vanecek should be able to make this save, and for a fragile team like the Sharks, who had just fallen behind 3-0 in the first period of the previous game, they wanted that better start. To have them be in the hole so early on, definitely disappointing, and gotta point some fingers at Vanecek for that. But the one that even stands out above it is the fourth goal here from William Karlsson shorthanded. This is where the Sharks were beginning to make a little bit of a comeback. Granlund scored, they get this power play, but Vanecek extremely uncommittal on this position here. As the puck is coming into the zone, he has to make the call 50-50 here. Either he skates all out for this puck to get to it before Karlsson and then makes the play out of the zone, or he stays back in his own net, he gets set for the chance. Either play would have been fine, but instead he kind of goes for a mix. He tries to find the middle ground here where he's at first skating slowly towards the puck, then he makes a last second call to go for it, he gets beat, and he ends up giving up this goal, and that really kind of put it away for the Sharks. So two major mistakes here, well, one bad goal and then one major mistake for Vitek Vanecek, so he was not particularly good here tonight. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Monday. We'll be taking on the Utah Hockey Club for the first time. This is pretty much just a team that's identical to the Arizona Coyotes. They just sort of moved to a different city, but still, it is the first time that they will be facing off against the Utah Hockey Club, at least in the regular season, not counting preseason or rookie face-off tournament or anything like that. And we shall see if the Sharks' losing streak to open this season gets extended to double digits, just as it did last year. Class dismissed.